Today I'm going to show you how I transformed this mostly unusable loft into this. And the thing about the internet is it makes things look like it was easy. And to be honest, what you're seeing took me about 6 months of work, and I'm still not fully finished with it. So when you tackle a giant project like this and are forced to edit it down to a short, watchable video or two, it almost feels like you're undervaluing the work because the viewer on the other end gets to see something done that took months of effort boiled down to minutes or seconds of their day. I'm fortunate enough that I get to do this and oftentimes work with fantastic brands that help me be able to continue to make videos. But if you're tackling a project on your own, without cameras, without anybody watching, just know that I'm proud of you for trying. And I'm glad that you watch my videos, and I hope that they give you some inspiration. Watching it in a condensed format like this can make it look easy. But at the end of the day, I know how hard you're working. So basically all I'm saying is keep up the good work. Now, as you may have gathered up to this point, the first step was to extend this small loft area. And I did that by closing off this kind of unusable space and extending the second floor. So what I did was utilize the existing structural beam here. And I used that beam to carry one end of the new floor joist, and then I inset a ledger board inside the exterior wall, and then used some joist hangers to hang the other end of the floor joist. So that gave me a new ceiling here in the entryway, and then also the extended floor of the room above. Now, when you're making a big change like this, the hardest part is often the electrical. These switches were all controlled downstairs, so I had to make some changes, which I can get into later for the upstairs. But for now, I just added some new can lights in the entryway and tied them to the existing entryway lighting, which had these big boob lights on it, which we were not a big fan of, so got rid of those. And once all that was buttoned up, it kind of looked like this. And that brings me to my least favorite part of pretty much every single remodel project, which is, of course, drywall. And it especially sucks in this house because, as I've mentioned before, this house is full of ridiculous textures, which means that every remodel project that I do double sucks because I have to deal with getting rid of those hideous textures. And because this is part of the entryway and one room kind of flows into the next, it means I have to do a lot of drywall work. So this is only really stage one of the drywall work that I have to do because I have to redo the rest of the entryway. Not only that, but these are solid wood beams in the ceiling and I want to expose them. But unfortunately, they covered them in drywall joint compound and then painted over them, which means that I have the joy of trying to get all that off so that I can expose the wood underneath. And that turned out to be a nightmare and much harder than I was expecting. So to give myself a break from that, I shifted back to the drywall and got everything primed in this area so that I can come back later and be ready for paint. Now, as I mentioned, I have to remove the texture in the drywall of the whole entryway, which gives me an opportunity to address this closet that my wife hates. And rightfully so. It's a complete waste of space. It only has a single shelf, and it's just terrible. And seemingly like everything else in this house, whoever did it didn't know what they were doing. And they framed out all the doors like this, which means they used the 2x6 as the jamb, and the jamb extended out past the walls, and then they would butt trim up against it, which is not how you do it. So I had to remove the jamb and then make the rough opening slightly smaller so that it fits a standard closet-sized door frame. While doing that, I took the opportunity to patch and fix the drywall, which they never bothered to do inside here. And then I had my son build us a little organizer for inside the closet. So I tossed that up, and I gave us each a little area that we could organize our stuff. My wife and I were up top, and then we could hang my son's jackets and stuff down below. And at this point, the space was basically looking like this, which became abundantly clear that these stairs weren't going to work. And rather than waiting till I had a budget and a timeline in place, I impulsively did what I always do. I figured, you know what? I'm just going to tackle it now with everything else. This is a really unique staircase, and the issues that I have with it are 1, the railing sucks, and 2, we hate the carpet. It also kind of creates a choke point down at the bottom of the stairs where the hallway gets a little bit narrow because the staircase cuts into it. We explored going a different option and perhaps adding a spiral staircase, but all that would do is create the choke point closer to the entryway, so we abandoned that idea, and I decided that I was going to restore this one. After tearing out the railing and taking the carpet off the stairs and pulling about 300,000 staples per step, I found that each one of these treads is actually a solid piece of Douglas fir, which, as someone who is both cheap and a woodworker, was a delightful surprise because I'm confident that I can restore these. So what I did was pull off every single tread, and I used some black epoxy to fill in all the knots and cracks and different things, and then I used my planer and my joiner to clean them up as much as possible, which, as you can imagine, took forever. Each step had to have all the staples removed and all the different knots and cracks filled. Some were easier than others, but all of them took time. And the bottom step particularly was a bit of a challenge because it had a post running through it. So I had to make a patch to fill in that section because I'm going to do a different style of railing. So I glued in another piece, and then since I knew you were going to be able to see it, I decided to make it a feature rather than a distraction. And I did that by inlaying some walnut bow ties into it, which I thought would kind of look nice. And not only do I think they look nice, they also add some strength to that area of the step. So I got to bust out my chisels and kind of do a little bit of fancy woodworking, which is nice to do every once in a while. And once all that was done, I added a little stain to the steps and a bunch of coats of polyurethane to give them a nice hardened finish, and more or less that's the story of the treads. However, while all this was going on, I had a completely different challenge on the rest of the stairs. Much like the wood beams in the ceiling, the stringer for this set of stairs was covered in joint compound and painted as well. Not only that, but I realized that the steps themselves were not really adequately supported. They just used these Simpson strong ties to support the steps and then had some bolts coming through the wall on the backside to support the steps on the other end. So I wanted to come up with a better solution that was both decorative and structural. So what I did was design some new steel tread brackets that would set over the mono stringer that would give each tread a lot more support and kind of give the stringer an industrial steel looking vibe. So I designed these things on my computer and then I sent them off to Send Cut Send to have them cut out and sent back. And then all I had to do was weld them all together, clean up the welds and paint them, and then I could bolt them onto the stringer, which I also painted black. Now, before I could reinstall the tread, I had to remove the texture in the drywall behind the staircase. So, lucky for me, more drywall work. This also means we had to settle on the paint color for the entryway at this point. So, my wife settled on this one. I wasn't a big fan originally, but it's grown on me over time, and you'll see as everything comes together. So finally, I was ready to reinstall the treads, and that required me to just bolt them on to the new brackets that I put in place, and I also added some strong tie support against the wall into the studs, so these steps are now rock solid. And since we settled on a paint color, remember that entry closet? Well, I installed some new doors on that as well. With the stair treads and stringer finished, next I had to figure out how I was going to tackle the railing. And as I'm kind of going for a modern industrial kind of look, I wanted to go with a cable railing, which I've never done before. But back at the beginning of this project, when I thought we might want to explore going with a spiral staircase, I reached out to a company called Paragon Stairs. And as I previously mentioned, we ended up abandoning that idea just because it just wasn't practical for us. But they did do custom railings as well. So I reached back out to them and I started working with Sam. And we went back and forth a ton of times, taking measurements, trying to figure out everything via phone call, FaceTime, you name it. But we managed to come up with a set of plans that I was happy with, where we basically have a straight set of railing for the bottom, and I would handle the curve transition by building a custom handrail. So they built me the custom steel posts with the cable and sent me 2 long pieces of their red oak handrail so that I could make a custom handrail for the top. So the next step was just to get these installed according to the set of plans and get everything lined up and bolted down to the treads. Paragon was super easy to work with, and I really appreciate their help on this project. Yes, I paid for the railing, but they did give me a discount, which I appreciate very much. So once I had the posts in place, here's what it looked like. Now, as you can see, the posts stop once the stairs start to make a turn. So the railing has to continue on, make the turn, and change pitch to match the stairs. So I've got my work cut out for me to make that possible. But first, I'm going to install the cables. This is my first experience working with a cable railing, but it's pretty easy. On one end of the cable, you install this threaded plug nut. I don't know what it's actually called, and I don't have the energy to look it up, but basically this is the end you tension from. Then you feed the cable up through the holes in the railing, and then on the other end, you slip on this kind of one-way tightening bolt. The cable passes through it only in one direction. As you tension the cable from the other end, it pulls on this end, but it can't go the other way. But here's the problem. I need the handrail in place before I tighten these down because I don't want the cables to pull the posts out of plumb. If you don't know what plumb means, that means straight up and down. There's a difference between plumb and level. Level is horizontal, plumb is vertical. So it's time to use my wood and math brain to figure out this transition. And I'm going to save you all a big headache and show you that this is what I came up with. Not going to lie, might have dropped a few F-bombs trying to figure this out, but here we are. So once I got the railing stained and finished, then I could screw it on top of the posts and then focus on tightening down the cables. Now you only have so much tightening ability on these nuts, so you need the cables to be a little bit snug in the first place before you start tightening them. The easiest way for me to do that was to use an F-clamp to kind of hold onto the cable and then tug it. The clamp also held it in place so that when I was tightening it down with the Allen wrench, it wasn't spinning the cable as well. So I used a Dremel tool to cut it off, and then it comes with these little decorative caps that you just snap over the end so it looks finished. So here's the stairs before, and here's the way the stairs look now. I tried to tie the entry room and the stairs together by adding a wood slat wainscoting, and so here's what everything looks like all tied together. Now it's not completely finished, but it's in a good spot to where we're comfortable with it for now. And that means we're now ready to go upstairs. And just a reminder, here's what it looked like before. And the library will be its own room, so it needs to have a wall. And in order to do that, I have to cut open the ceiling. And why, you might ask? Well, because I have to block it. And block it means that I have something to mount the top plate of the wall to. So I have to put in these little pieces of wood between the rafters so that I have something to nail to. So once I have all those in place, then I can start building the wall. And rather than building it on the floor and standing it up, it's easier for me in this case to just build the wall in place. In the middle here, we're going to have a set of French doors. So I'm just going to leave that pass-through open for now and frame the rest of it. Then I can throw up some drywall and run the electrical. I'll spare you the nuance of running the electrical, only because it required a lot of tracing, finding junction boxes, going back, figuring out what was on what breaker and what was controlled downstairs so that I could then control it upstairs. It was a whole big ordeal in and of itself. But long story short is I put some sconces on the outside of the wall, which will be controlled on a three-way switch from downstairs or upstairs, and then there's power inside the room itself to control the lighting to come. And then I updated the insulation with some rock wool because this part is actually kind of an exterior wall because this juts out of the roof. And with all that done, then I could button up the floor. And I'll be honest, I almost fell through the floor several times. So it's a bit of a miracle that I hadn't fallen through the floor up till this point. And the reason why I left it open this long is because of the electrical stuff. I was running wiring and all that stuff. So I needed it open until I got all that finished. But it was a happy day when I got to close the floor up because then I didn't have to worry about ruining any of the work that I did downstairs. And that also meant that I could start closing up my mess and actually making this feel like a usable room, which is always a good feeling. After you spent many months with things torn apart, it's great just to have things closed back up because it makes you feel like you've made real progress. But naturally, I wasn't done making a mess because I still had to remove the old crown molding and some more drywall that they had over what will be some new beams. So like always, the celebration was short-lived. But from there, then I could start building the bookcases. I decided to go with the IKEA Billy bookcase, mostly because I couldn't even buy the material to build a custom bookcase for the price of one of these. And they're pretty good quality, and I'm basically going to build them as a built-in, so by the time I'm done with it, you'll never even know that they were IKEA and I didn't build them from scratch. So I ended up buying 8 of them total and spacing them out on the wall evenly, and then I built a little face frame to go around them, which covered up the gaps between the bookcases and also ties them together to make them look like one big bookcase. And then I did the matching setup on the other side of the room. Now, don't mind that little gap back there. There's kind of this little opening here, and my son ultimately wants to put a little hidden room in there, but I'm hoping he forgets about it because it's more work. So I'm leaving it open for now, but we'll see if I ever get around to doing it or not. And then it was time for my favorite thing of all time, and that's drywall. And you all know how I feel about that, but I had to get rid of the old texture that was on the walls that I reused. And fortunately, because I put the bookcases up, I didn't really finish the drywall behind them because it's hidden behind the bookcases. So I had to do the wall and I had to remove the texture on the ceiling, which absolutely sucked and my neck hurt for a while. I think all in, I did 3 coats of joint compound. I did a skim coat, kind of sanded that down roughly, did another skim coat, sanded that down, and then I did a top coat and smoothed it all out. So the ceiling was a lot of work, but it's done now, so love that for me. But once all the drywall is done, then I could focus on priming everything and getting it ready for paint, which is very easy to do when you have a giant paint sprayer. The only problem is there was very little ventilation in this room, so I had to take a few breaks to let the overspray settle down, but in the end, this is what the room looks like. So now the fun part begins, and that starts with the paint. And about a year ago, I got contacted by a woman from a company called C2 Paint, which I wasn't familiar with. And she said, hey, keep us in mind for an upcoming project if you have one. Many months later, they were the first ones I thought of when it came to doing this project. And they were lovely to work with, and they sent over a bunch of samples. And my wife and I settled on this color called foliage, which is kind of a dark foresty green. So they provided the paint for this project, and I just want to say thank you. I'm very grateful that you were willing to do that. And next time you guys have a paint project, consider stepping out of the big box store and supporting a smaller business. And for you more nuanced people who want to know more about the tools and the gear that I'm using, I'm spraying it with my Graco X7 paint sprayer with a Fine Finish LP208 tip. This is a fine finish cabinet tip. It's the same tip I used when I redid my kitchen at my previous house. Because this room is mostly bookcases, I'm kind of going with a cabinet sprayer. Then it was time to do the floor. Now, I'm not crazy about the flooring, but the reason why I'm doing it is because it matches the rest of the house. And I don't have the budget in me to change the flooring in the whole house. So we had a couple boxes of this left over, and I just bought more to match. If and when we want to, we can choose to upgrade it later. I don't hate it either. It just kind of part of that trend of everything being gray and white that every realtor in the past 15 years seems to have advised everyone to do when they were going to sell their house. But anyway, it's not my vibe. Now, I've DIY'd almost everything up to this point, but when it came to installing the French doors, I did bring in a pro. He's also my buddy. This is Dan from IRT Carpentry, who you should follow on Instagram. And I've done a lot of doors and a handful of French doors by myself, but having an extra set of hands on a set of French doors, especially when it's from somebody who installs them nearly every day, is well worth its weight in gold, especially when the doors are a pain in the ass like this one, because I went cheap on them and bought them from a big box store, sight unseen, online. What I should have done is just hired Dan, let him get the doors from his people, and then sat my ass down and had ice cream or something. But DIY is like 60% stubbornness and 40% being cheap. Or maybe that's just me, I don't know. But I'm thankful Dan was able to lend a hand and we got the doors working as well as they possibly could. Now here's where we started punching some stuff up with some character. Whose idea it was to do this remains a point of contention between me and my wife. But we decided we wanted to put a leaded glass transom window over the French doors. And so I got to work building a jamb for it. I ordered it on Etsy from an artist, and she did a great job building it. So I just had the nerve-wracking job of framing it and installing it, which was absolutely terrifying. And it kind of ties into what I did downstairs, which I glossed over. But I added a little lead glass looking privacy film on the entry windows. So here's what it looked like all trimmed out and painted. And then I moved on to building faux alder beams for the ceiling while my wife got to decorating. Building just one of the beams is a pretty involved process, so I'm going to spare you all the details on that. If you want to see that, just let me know in the comments. But in the end, it ended up looking like this. And after installing it and a little fandelier, the whole thing looked like this, which is basically a kind of finished project. Ignore those two missing beams in the ceiling and just imagine that there's a second and a third one to match this one. Okay, perfect. And so as you can see in the eyes of the internet, this project is completely done. Great job, everybody. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.